Hey everyone, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan. Very excited to be talking about values-based innovation. We have Margarita Quihuis joining us on the show. Hi, Margarita.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
Thank you so much for coming on the program. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Very excited to have you on, and also that we had Mark Nelson on the show. We had Jinxia New on the show as well, talking about peace technology, the Peace Innovation Lab. For those that don't know Margarita's background, she's co-director of Stanford's Peace Innovation Lab and member of the Behavior Design Lab, applying systematic ways to shift human behavior for business and societal outcomes. And you can find all the links in the bio below to her website, as well as the Peace Innovation websites and the LinkedIn, Twitter profiles. Margarita, I've had such a good time talking to you before we started. Let's jump into things with understanding more about why exactly your heart beats for this.
My heart beats for this because I have a son. And he's 19, and there's something transformative that happens to someone when you have a child. All of a sudden, whatever you were doing, it's a marker in your life. There's, before child and after child. And when you're holding this baby in your arms, you think, I would do anything. I would devote my life so this child could have a happy, thriving life ahead of them. And I think the thing that drives me is my son, quite honestly. It's like, how do I take what I have and direct it toward that outcome? That there's a healthy world for him to grow up in, and that I've had a good run. It's and for him, when he's my age, I want him to have had a good life. And so I want to be able to tell him on my deathbed, I did everything I could. Especially in this era where we have all these existential threats, where it's one of those rare times in history where you have to step back and think, what am I doing, and will it be of consequence? Especially when the stakes are so high. That's why I do this.
Yeah, I like how you put it. It's a big marker in our lives when we continue propagating on the cycle of life, and we want to make sure that the children of the next generation have an incredible quality of life, and they're able to adventure into consciousness with a great amount of basic needs that are met for them, that they can unleash their full creativity, find meaning in life, all this good type of stuff. I love the focus on that, and helping catalyze change in behavior to have a greater degree of stewardship for Earth, or just a better understanding of the ultimate nature of reality, why we're even here, is just a very important thing that we're very passionate about, that we talk about a lot in the program. And it's very difficult to make impact on people's lives that lasts more than just the moment. And that's something that I'm pumped to talk to you about as well. How did you figure out on your life journey that this is what your heart was going to end up beating for?
If you had asked me when I was 17, I did not know. My life has been based on a pull rather than a push. When I was growing up, I'm part Yaqui, so I'm half Native American, and the oral histories of my family, and how not only are we survivors, but we're warriors. So we were one of the few native tribes that weren't conquered in North America. And that's a very powerful origin story.
Yeah.
Right? To know that you have the DNA of all your ancestors, and they've all worked, their lives were in the hope of someone like me. Mm-hmm. And there's this saying that I saw on the internet saying that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're going like, wow, if I'm carrying the DNA of all the generations behind me, and there's interesting research about how mothers have the cells of their children inside them, and our children have our cells inside them as well. Mm-hmm. And so there's also this chain that connects us
Yeah.
to all at least for me, if all my female ancestors, right? That's pretty cosmic, right? And so they're going. So sometimes I feel all these native girls on my shoulder looking through my eyes, and they're going like, "Wow, we made it this far. So what are we going to do now, right? If we've come this far, we must have a purpose."
Yeah.
We came here for a reason, and part of, I think, for everyone, their quest is to find out what their why is. Why are they here?
Yes.
And for me, it's to continue to be present, that all those people, all those native peoples, all those indigenous people, it's like I feel like a spy. Like I'm in disguise. I have this skin on, right, and the whatever, and the modern clothing and all that. But all my ancestors are along for the ride. They go like, "Damn, we finally got in the room." Okay. And with these decision makers and with these influencers and so on. And so part of my responsibility is making sure that voice gets heard and gets represented.
Yeah, I love that cosmic perspective. If you go back to our parents and their parents and their parents, and you just keep going back, we all come from the same source, first place. And then on top of that, then there's this idea that you actually do carry all of your lineage. You carry your lineage. They're in a sense, especially for someone that is coming from a Native American background here, that you're at the table, like you said. You're at the table. You're working with influencers on making drastic change now that can hopefully catalyze a new era, a new world of maximizing our prosperity. So I love that cosmic perspective to it. Okay, this is I think pretty hard to understand, because this is a little bit more of what sometimes we would think of as an abstract moonshot that we can somehow figure out how to incentivize peace on our planet. There's actually a lot of value that's in peace, and people like financial incentive. So
sure.
So teach us about that and about what you guys are then figuring out how to do at Peace Innovation Lab.
Sure. I mean, peace is an abstract concept, right? It's about as vague as you can get, along with many other things that are very aspirational. You see that in corporate mission statements. You see that in people's personal statements, or even a society or a religion. They're very aspirational. You say, well, what does that mean in the day-to-day? And so in our lab, given our heritage coming from BJ Fogg's then Persuasive Technology Lab, we care about how people behave toward each other. And actually that also speaks to my own life, in terms of discrimination, racism, sexism, or whatever. I cannot control what people think of me. I don't have any influence over that. And so I do care how they treat me, what their behavior is. And as long as their behavior is fair, I actually don't care what they think. In some ways, and we're in the positive peace business, so when we're talking about that, we're talking about prosocial behavior. And so we really unpack that, go like, here we are in the Bay Area, and we're going about our work, and we go to the grocery store, and we drive on the roads, and so on and so forth. And it's remarkable that 15 million people get along as well as they do. If you thought, I'm going to put 15 million people in a small space, and you got to navigate the day, when you stop and really reflect on your day, it is remarkably free of friction. We know how to interact with each other. We're not breaking out at fistfights at the Starbucks. We take turns at stop signs. We know how to queue up. We do this, we do that, and the other. All of that, those tiny instances, those are behaviors of positive peace. And I think one of the challenges that we have right now in civil society, given the polarization, is how do we continue to maintain that as a really good habit, to be kind to each other, to show respect, to show compassion, to show empathy. And you say empathy, let's do empathy, and you go, whoa, that sounds really abstract. Well, what does empathy mean in the moment? What does compassion mean in the moment? It might mean, I was on the airplane flying back from Amsterdam, and I'm recovering from an infection, and so the antibiotics had me a little bit weak and tired. and I was trying to get my bag into the overhead because I was single traveler, right? And the steward came up and said, "Can I help you with that?" And I go, "How did you know?" And it was effortless. It was a tiny act of kindness, right? And he's going like, "Okay, there's a small woman struggling with this bag, trying to get it up over her head, and let me just take care of that in that moment." And so that's what we mean in terms of behavior, right? And so how do we cultivate that behavior? How do we reinforce that? In corporate parlance, that's creating a great customer experience, right?
This kind of immediately is jumping me into, like you said, there's 15 million people in this densely packed metropolis area, and that the idea that they can function harmoniously together as a society in the fabric that we exist in is in itself already miraculous. And there are these tiny little instances of peace that are being incentivized because when everyone agrees to a specific modality of existing on the money is this, the transit systems are this way, and you agree on these things, at least until better things are created that can then archive the old ones, that then it makes it so that you can have a more frictionless society that gets places faster, that can create more effectively, that can provide basic needs better. But then, as you're giving me this example with the steward, the flight attendant, there's this, to me, like, that it's almost like who were their parents, because their parents must have had somewhat of a pretty serious influence on the child's upbringing, where the child sees someone that needs assistance with their bag or needs assistance crossing the street or whatever it is, and that they go and approach them and help them.
Right.
And that this whole idea of like a social credit system or some sort of an immediate reward feedback loop that happens for positive behavior, positive prosocial behavior, which is what we had as a definition on that show with Mark, which we really like. Positive prosocial behavior just sounds like, why wouldn't we want to have that everywhere?
Right.
And then, like, what's this idea of, well, what if I had an immediate feedback loop where I see you, I help you in some way, and then maybe I gain a couple like social credit points? Maybe,
but even more, it doesn't have to be as complicated as that. It's and I when I work with corporate executives, and I was doing this the other week, I said, like, okay, here's an example. I want you to break up into groups, and there are two coffee shops, and they're right next to each other, coffee shop A and coffee shop B. Why do you prefer one over the other? And write down all the reasons. And then collectively say, okay, why do you do it? Like, well, and I go, because it's beans, it's hot water, they got tables, they got chairs, they got a counter. All these things are commodities. This is very utilitarian, right? So they're the same. So why do you prefer one over the other? And we started to talk about aesthetics. We started to talk about feelings. We started talking about the sublime, right? And that is what makes something special. That is what makes a relationship or an experience special. If you, back in the day when Virgin Airlines was operating, and then you had United, and United, of course, was in the headlines for how they treated their passengers and dragging them off and so on. And people would say, well, I'm in a highly regulated industry. It's very hard for me to innovate. And I go, look, but United and Virgin are in a highly regulated industry. They got planes. The planes got to operate this way. They don't have any control over the airports. They don't have any control over when they take off and land. There's a lot that is dictated. But it's the stuff that isn't dictated that makes a difference in the experience, right? And it's those intentional choices and the point of view that they have about the customer, how they regard them, what they're trying to do. And when Branson talked about designing Virgin, he says, I come from entertainment. Nightclubs and music, and so to me, they are guests. And so this is basically a flying nightclub in the sky. I got pink and blue lights, and you get cocktails on demand and great music, and it's a great atmosphere, because that's what I want. That's the experience I want to recreate. And the venue happens to be a very funky club venue. It happens to be on a plane. United looks at people as if they're moving freight. You're just an object that's to be moved from point A to point B at that time. And if it's overbooked, well, I have too many boxes. Let me just remove a box, right? Hence the dentist who lost his teeth and so on and so forth. But if you and I were to brainstorm and say, how can we create a really great customer experience, and what do we do in the case when the plane is overbooked, I bet you our 100 top ideas would not include dragging that guy off the plane and breaking his teeth. Who would do that? And yet it happens, right? And so if you step back and say, what are my values? And what is the feeling that I want my customer to have? And this comes from video games, actually, from my game designer. My thoughts are very much influenced by Chris Bennett. So like game designers think about, what is it that I want the player to feel emotionally? What do I want them to feel physiologically? Are they, are they excited? Are they shaking adrenaline? Are they frustrated? Are they confused? Are they elated? And then what are the game mechanics and dynamics that I'm putting into play in order to elicit that emotion, in order to elicit that physiology?
So in this sense, this would be like the steward or flight attendant noticing that maybe your emotional levels are in some sort of a state that are in need of physical assistance, and they come over and they because they are maybe more sensitive, they're aware of your emotional state, they come over and assist you physically with lifting your luggage into the compartment, and then they see your emotional relief.
Right.
They see you happier.
Right.
You are like, oh, think someone noticed and helped me, and I have more relief. I was feeling sick as well. And so then, the flight attendant then gets also, they're like, oh, I was able to help someone. I feel great as well.
Exactly. And that's a different kind of currency. So game designers talk about different currencies when they're putting together games. They're doing the economics, and a lot of games they don't start with the art and what the characters look like. They start with a spreadsheet, and they figure out what the different currencies are. And so in society, we also have different currencies, but we tend to focus only on the dollar. But there are emotional currencies, reputational currencies, social status currencies that people are willing to trade in, right? And so in that moment, with the flight attendant, he had the opportunity to, if I was thinking as a game designer, it's like, oh, here's an opportunity for me to delight her. I'm going to give her delight, and I'm going to relieve her anxiety.
Yes.
So it's both, right?
Yes. And also themselves feeling like they get a boost
exactly,
as well.
And they get a boost out of that as well. And we know from the psychology research that happens, right? And so then it's not just about dollars, but it's about other rewards that are happening as well.
I like the view of this from the perspective of a game designer. I think that's so crucial, because we on the show talk frequently about, what is this big game that we're all embedded in? What is source? What is creation? Why are we on a rock orbiting star and we birth into these bodies and we have these endeavors into consciousness? And one of the ways that we frequently address this is from the perspective of a designer, like a universe designer. Like, why is it designed this specific way? And when you think about that more deeply, you kind of get into all of this also. It is slightly more esoteric and like metaphysical, but it also science and spiritual, but at the same time it is this like deeply emotional, practical, another being that has consciousness is in need of some sort of assistance, and I can have a deeper amount of emotional intelligence and just presence in general with another person that has consciousness in assisting them with this process. And that again is not necessarily immediately increasing my social score in the world, but it has not unlike an actual digital ledger, a physical score yet,
right.
But it is some sort of an interpersonal dynamics that, like we said, there's a psychological boost here, there's a anxiety decrease for you and an emotional boost for you.
And it could have been played out. I mean, so let's think as like game designers, right? So we have the mechanic and the dynamic. The mechanic is the suitcase. The dynamic is lifting it up, right? So that's the behavior, the action. He could have done it, and the physiological and emotional outcome could have been shame, embarrassment, humiliation, anger, on my part, depending upon his tone, right? So it's not just the fact of I'm going to take the bag in and put it up. It's how you do it and the intention behind it.
Like the idea of it being potentially like, oh, another customer that needs help with this process.
Right. Or he just jerks it out of my hand, or he...
Versus, oh, let me help
Exactly.
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that is the difference. That little delta is the difference, because both acts are utilitarian. So here we are. The design problem is you need to help, the person needs to get their bag in the overhead.
Yeah, so interesting. So both acts being utilitarian and helping.
Mechanically, they're the same.
Mechanically the same, but they have a
different
deeper emotional,
physiological outcome.
Yeah,
and so if he did it in a way that upset me, and I'm taking this antibiotic, which makes me very tired and vulnerable anyway, then that would have set off, as Mark would say, this whole neurochemical stream in my body that would have affected me in a much deeper level in my body, right?
Versus in this case, you actually went up.
I actually went up. I felt relief. I felt safe. I felt like if I asked him to do something for me, it would be okay. I wouldn't be embarrassed, right?
Let me see if then examples like this for you guys are, you get to analyze examples, these positive prosocial behaviors. Then you get to also work with corporations. You gave this example with like United versus Virgin Airlines. There's so many other examples with corporations, as well as just what are these positive prosocial behaviors, and you give these really good examples, and you try and catalyze then more awareness with what we just described.
Exactly. You can design this. You can be intentional, and translating this to a language that corporates that it resonates with. This is about how to do. Here's this thing. We're in a day and age where so many products are just commodities. Everything comes manufactured out of China. So you got this and you got that, and they're the same. So why would someone choose you over somebody else?
Intent, usually values.
The intent is going to be because of how you make them feel.
Interesting.
Right?
So intent and values are about how you make them feel.
Right, and it has to resonate with what they care about, because otherwise it's just molded plastic versus molded plastic. It's an app versus an app. Even in financial services, it's bank A versus bank B. I mean, the differentiation with a lot of products and services in the world is marginal. It really is. And so if you want to have a competitive advantage, it's all about how you treat people. And to the extent that you can be kinder, warmer, more compassionate, more empathetic, that is a net positive in the world, because then that person goes about their day and they feel better, and that emotion is contagious. And what's interesting about working with corporates is that they have resources and they have pain points. They're trying to be more profitable. They're trying to find an edge. And so they come to us and say, we want, digital transformation, or we need to be more innovative. And I always say, why? Is it because it's the fad because everyone else is? And if you do that, how will it be any different than what you have right now? And for your customer, they're not thinking whoa, what I'm really looking forward is, going to XYZ's corporate website. They don't think that. They're thinking about their personal needs, their goals, their aspirations, where they want to go in the world, and looking, and in that moment where they go, oh, I need a tool, I need something to help me get there, right?
Yes.
But people aren't product centric. They're personal goal centric. They're family centric. They're relational centric. My mom is sick. I need X. Right? That's what drives a lot of human behavior. So you need to understand that.
Okay. So when we were talking before, we started endeavoring into this idea of this big why behind everything that we do. And when it's when it's very clear, this idea of like a big why, well, okay, well, it's not just I want to make the world better, but it's a very clear, like, I'm making the world better in this specific way because of this specific value or belief that I have. And then it becomes more clear, okay? And then the examples of when we were talking, we kind of made it clear that, well, if you're going to build tech, and everyone uses these examples, but it's just that, like, you really can build tech with more values-based innovation and intention and emotional awareness, where it's driven more in the direction of raising the basic needs for people around the world, and not having those slips of malevolence that occur with technology, because we don't have the ethicists or the philosophers or the moral scientists that are embedded with computer scientists and chemists and biology engineers. Like, we just need a little bit more foresight when it comes to putting together the biggest corporations around the world and the biggest governments around the world and how they interplay with each other. And so this idea of having like a big why. Well, why should there be some sort of a peace incentive or peace innovative inclusive stakeholding system that occurs when I, as a computer scientist, am bringing some sort of value to the world, and all of a sudden I tie in an ethicist along the way. What does that do? Well, it actually has a value that's attached to it, which is that the $50,000 or $100,000 a year that I pay for an ethicist to come and work with a team of computer scientists actually has effects of multiple millions of dollars down the line of malevolence that is actually
that just never happens.
That never happens.
It's interesting. There was a New York Times story on the top AI guy at Facebook and his career and how brilliant he was and so on and so forth, and how his job day to day is figuring out, developing AI to root out really malicious content. And it is, child pornography and terrorism and people beheading each other and the worst of the worst, right? Mm-hmm. And I felt so sorry for him, because here was someone who was talented, who said, I'm going to study computer science and AI because I want to make the world a better place in some manner. And he spent his day and his team's day in the thankless task of sort of like cleaning out the Aegean stables every day. And there's just more crap, and there's just more crap, and they can't keep up with it.
What is the root cause?
Right, and because what they had done was they had opened up this Pandora's box, and there was just no putting it back. And so his career has been reduced to that, and it was sad. It was poignant, because it's like how depressed he must be, because every day he has to go in and he's got a teaspoon to try to clean out this thing, and at the end of the day he goes, I didn't even make a dent, and when I come back there's going to be 10 times more.
What is the root cause of us propagating terrorism videos or beheading videos? And there's something that is just, when children are born into the world, they don't get that recognition that this is a divine place for them to have had the opportunity to pursue a conscious endeavor. And when we're still globally not recognizing that this is a divine place that we can all have great abundance and love and prosperity on, then we're going to run into issues like this. We have an example that you gave me earlier that I thought was really interesting. When you dive into the depths of forced migration and of climate change, you find some very crazy things that you were teaching me about, and your solution to it was really cool.
The peace and conflict and climate change are intertwined. When we look at the challenges of this century, it's going to be food, water, energy security, and that's a constant in terms of humanity. But it's more acute now because of climate. It's changing the boundary conditions. It's changing the context in which people operate in. So when you look at the mass migrations that we've seen from Central America, people don't leave their home unless it's the decision of last resort. In Syria, many researchers looked at the root cause of the civil war and said it was due to climate change. And what's interesting, and it was about the cost of bread. Now, mind you, bread is the food of last resort. When we think about what we eat, there are commodities trading that's done on grains, soy, corn, wheat, because you can store that and it has a very, very long shelf life, right? And so people can eat bread for a long time. The thing that doesn't store indefinitely is produce, fruit, vegetables, spices. And so if you're in a region, we don't have a way to detect when there's scarcity. There's sudden drop off of all of a sudden the marketplace, there's a marked reduction in fresh fruit, locally grown fresh fruit and vegetables, right? And so that's actually, and so there's no red light that goes off on anyone's desk that says, oh, we need to look at that, because if this continues, then the next thing, once that food source has been eliminated, all you really have is bread. And if the bread prices go up, is because and people are rioting over the cost of bread, it's because they don't have anything else to eat. And we don't have a good way to detect that. But imagine if we did. Then we could get ahead of these problems. Because by the time that people have to migrate, then it becomes a political issue. And certainly we saw that in Germany a few years ago as Syrians were migrating into Germany. And everyone's going like, well, I'll take a few, but I'm not going to take many. And then you have refugees, and the refugee camps, you think they're not going to be around for long. They'll be around for 20 years. These people who are stateless, who are jobless, who can't get integrated into the local economy, because people don't want that flood of cheap labor. Right? So it's a protectionism behavior. Like, okay, we're going to keep them here and hopefully they'll go away. They'll go back. We're just going to have more and more of that. So, how do we, if we know that that's going to be an issue, then I'm going, okay, you got to go. Wayne Gretzky, where's the puck going to be? What do we need to put in place so we can detect that and address it when the problem is small and relatively inexpensive, both economically and politically?
I love this scarcity meter or scarcity radar, or just a prediction capability through pattern analysis of observing less produce being made, more people purchasing bread, more scarcities being developed. Well, there's likely some sort of issue that's happening in that area. And given the continuation of that issue, you can expect to have more symptoms arise. And so having foresight with the way that we are able to leverage artificial intelligence and computer science pattern recognition to do things like prevent forced mass migrations and prevent other sorts of, like, children having trauma growing up because of things like that. And so that saves, again, millions and billions of dollars when you look at life trajectories and life outcomes and the need for like needing to use pharmaceuticals versus being able to like provide creative value to society. This is a very massive thing, but one of the big things that I think a lot of the time we talked about in our conversation and people like to know is like, okay, well, what do you do about something that is as drastic as having to, you can put in some sort of a pattern recognition system for that type of stuff, but there's some sort of other deeper rooted behavior change that has to happen, and how do you make it last longer than an incremental piece of content that somebody absorbs and then... Sure.
Yeah. I mean, so there are a couple of different ways that you can have lasting behavior change. And the most powerful one is changing the context. Okay, if you change the environment, you change the context, you change people's behavior. So people say, like, people never change, or it's so hard for me to change my habits. And I go travel for a month. Right? If you go travel for a month, all your old habits are broken because you're not waking up in your same old bed. You don't have your same old routine. I'm going to go to the bathroom and walk over to the kitchen, make myself a cup of coffee, settle down. All of that gets blown up, right? All of a sudden, you are thinking about, where am I going to eat? What am I going to do? And everything changes, right? Yeah. And then you come up with a new routine for travel, or you come up with a new routine for exercise while you're traveling, or whatever, right? And so when the environment changes, you change.
Yes.
And so guess what, planet? We're all in for a lot of change because our context is changing. And so the question is, how do we change and adapt in a way that is constructive and productive and prosocial? Okay. And how do we do it in a way where we can be good to each other?
And maybe where it's incentivized.
And where it's incentivized. And part of the incentive is, there's policy and law and legislation, because that basically provides the rules of the game. So it's interesting. So having spent enough time in Europe, you go, why, so Europe versus US, whatever. And I'm going like, wow, in Europe, they have a lot of labor protection. Okay, so you can't work 80 hours a week in the Nordics. It's just not allowed, unlike Silicon Valley. So that means, okay, they don't create Silicon Valley kind of craziness. On the other hand, there's no labor exploitation, right? Because that's the rule of the game. It's just not even on the table. So it's not like one company can say, well, I'm going to, I would love to have my people only work 30 hours a week, but my competitor has them work 60 hours a week, so I have to do that as well. This law level sets everyone and says, sorry, no one can get an unfair advantage by harming people this way. And harming people in terms of taking them away from their relationships, their families, all the other things that they need to do in civil society, we've contained it. Yes, we want your labor, but we want it like this, and the wages are going to be like that. And so, as a consequence, because of the rules of that game, you don't see massive homelessness in Europe the way you do here. Right? And here we're trying to solve homelessness, but the rules of the game are such that in a winner-take-all, you will get homelessness. There, they've said that we don't even want that as an outcome. So as we design this game, we just take that option off the table. The conditions that would allow for that, we pulled that card. That rule, we scratched it out. Just, you can't do that. So that's what, in terms of, the intentionality of how you design a society, right? And that's something that engineers don't do, because we don't study that. We don't study what is it to have a good life, or what is it to have a just society. We spend 4 years working on problem sets. It's the humanities majors who sit there, who think, who read, who write, who really ponder these issues. And I don't think we have enough humanities people in positions of leadership in Silicon Valley, because they would bring that necessary perspective and say, I want you to innovate, but I want you to do it in the service of creating a just society. And this is what it looks like. Can you innovate for that? And as an engineer, I just need to know what my conditions are. You say, this is the spec, it needs to do this, this, and this, and it has to cost this much, and this material, and got it. It's just, you add it to the design spec. So this is where, if we can bring these values at the point of design, then it's baked in.
Yeah. Oh man, it's like, if you see all of the potential trajectories that exist in terms of a civilization's outcome, or even at a smaller level, the nation's outcome, you can do things like, you can see those little bifurcating moments that send the civilization or the nation into worse outcomes, and you can take preventative measures that ensure that there are, the symptom of homelessness does not occur, the symptom of suicide does not occur, the symptom of poor stakeholding, inclusive stakeholding does not occur, because when there is no inclusive stakeholding, you get self-dealing habits of of physicians or of teachers or of corporations that deal to themselves rather than to the people that they actually serve, with their employees, with their customers, with society at large, the communities that they're in. This is so important, and it also kind of makes me think about, like, when you're talking about and this is the peace innovation has a you guys, this is like a collaborative project in the Netherlands that you guys,
we have an institute in the Netherlands. Yes,
institute in the Netherlands. And you were giving this example where you're talking about Europe taking some sort of measures that are different than the US is, and we're talking about making long-term behavior change. Well, you talked to me about this before we started, but if you do on your transit service, if you see the option for, if you walk, it's going to take this long, if you bike, it'll take this long, if you take a car, it'll take this long, if you, etc., bus, it'll take this long. But next to that is the price.
Right.
And it's just the price shows up.
Right.
But that third one is now the carbon footprint.
Right.
And then it becomes embedded in everything you see all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Once it was that, the app is called Transer, Tranzer, and it's in Europe. And Mark had downloaded it last week, and he goes, "Oh, Margarita, look at this." And he goes, "Look, it tells you what the cost is if you just drive yourself." Because normally when you get these transit apps, you're saying, I'm trying to get from point A to point B, like Google Maps, right? And it says, are you going to drive? Is it going to use transit? Are you going to walk? Are you going to bike? And it gives you the times. And so most people are looking, the metric that matters is time. Right.
And then money.
Right. And so then when you're looking at public transit, of course, they're telling you what the cost is. So that way you know.
Yes.
And so in this one, it told you the time and the route, and you got to get on the 16 tram, and then you transfer and blah blah blah, and the cost, boom boom boom. But then but if you choose not to do any of this and you just drive yourself, it was a difference between 11 euros and 35 euros. Mm-hmm. And the 35 euros were if you drove yourself. Now, how many of us are conscious of how much it costs us to drive 10 miles? We think it's free. Mm-hmm. We think that there isn't any cost because we already own the car. We have forgotten that cost. And so I did some screenshots, and I go, okay, so it's $35 if I drive myself, and then I click to see more, and then it tells me what my carbon footprint is when I drive. And that was interesting because then I said, oh, the metric that matters is carbon footprint. Because if we don't solve this in the next 10 years, it doesn't matter what the price was. It won't matter. All the money in the world is not going to help you if the planet is ruined. And so it would be interesting. If I could wave a magic wand, I would have a carbon footprint column on every receipt. And then all of a sudden you would start thinking, like, wait a minute. So
every item, like buying a computer, like buying a pillow,
right?
I mean, every item.
Tell me what the carbon footprint is, because then you would be going like, ooh, wait, what? Because then I'm making a different comparison.
You're also pushing people to understand the manufacturing processes of the items that they purchase, which actually decreases ignorance and increases awareness in general.
So if you wanted to move people away, so we're in the surveillance economy. There's a book about surveillance capitalism. We've moved from VHS to DVD to streaming service because it's so convenient. Isn't Netflix so great because it's so convenient? If someone told me what the carbon footprint was of Netflix maintaining server farms all around the world so I can just stream, The Good Place anytime I wanted, versus me getting the DVD from the library, I'm going like, oh, wait a minute. Do I actually need my router on 24/7? 9 hours of which my people are asleep, just so I could have the convenience of, in 10 seconds, being able to download an episode of The Good Place? Versus, here's a DVD player. When you want it, you plug it in, you put the DVD in, you play your movie, and you take it out. voila. I mean, it would be interesting to see a comparison of that. When I was in the doctor's office on Monday, they're taking my temperature, they're taking my blood pressure, and I had that carbon footprint moment where I'm going, wow, 40 years ago, the nurse would have come in with a mercury thermometer. She would have stuck it under my tongue, gotten the measurement off, written it down. She would have gotten the blood pressure pump, manually pumped it up, looked at the dial, got it. The carbon footprint for those two items is 0 and using them in operation, right? We're not excluding manufacture, but once you have it to do it, there's no carbon footprint. And now they have these fancy machines to get the same two numbers.
Yeah, there's definitely some nuance with manufacturing that leads up to the product, but also on the accuracy of the readouts of the data points. But in general, catalyzing more people through something as simple as adding the carbon footprint number on their transit app, I think is a really easy one that does that long-term awareness behavior change that we were talking about. And then also just the idea of when you look at everything at a store that it always has a carbon footprint attached to it. Maybe it even has to have a quick little paragraph or a quick little 20-second video about how it was manufactured as well. So that way about what resources were used, what was the the bill of materials, the supply chain of where it actually came from, where it was assembled, all this type of stuff, how it gets shipped. Because if we're talking carbon footprints of things that we buy, things have to be transited quite a distance to get to us, and barges are 90% of all world trade happens by barge, by sea, and then you have the automotive, the trucking that happens to move it from place to place as well. There's a lot of really interesting solutions with things like nuclear fusion. We need, this is a big thing. If you want energy that's free, close to as free as possible, or completely free or zero emission, you really need the teams of the best scientists in the world and the best funding in the world that pushes us towards innovating towards that free, forever sustainable nuclear fusion technology. Otherwise, we're gonna get stuck again with not identifying root issues. Energy was one, water was one, food was one. These are very root issues, basic needs, and.
Things that they're not going to go away. So let's fast forward 10 years.
Yes.
People are still going to be raising children. They still need to get food on the table. They still need to take care of their sick mother-in-law. All the stuff of the human condition continues. During the depths of World War II, people still needed to do all that. I assure you, during the Black Plague in the Middle Ages, people still needed to do all that. And the conditions were harsh. They were wicked. But they said, okay, the how of how I get the food on the table, of the how of how I take care of family members, the how of how I do employment, that changes. Right? And so for innovators, the opportunity is, this is a new design constraint. This is a new design opportunity, that inflection point, because we need to reinvent, re-engineer all of this stuff from the ground up. And this is what entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley do really well. So this is the opportunity where we can use our abilities to disintermediate, but do it in a very intentional, positive way. As opposed to, I'm going to disintermediate it and just, I just totally destroyed that industry and I made myself $1 gazillion, and say that industry is dead anyway. There are a lot of industries that are full of stranded assets because the carbon footprint is just going to be too expensive. You just can't continue. At some point, someone's going to call uncle and say, stop, game over. You guys are done. But that doesn't mean the need that company or that sector was filling has gone away. And so innovators then need to say, okay, how do I do this in a way where I minimize the carbon footprint? How do I do this in a way that maximizes people's ability to be good to each other?
Yep.
Because that's the way we're all going to survive and thrive.
And a lot of this comes from also what we were talking about beforehand, which is this process of teaching critical thinking and teaching nuance, teaching emotional intelligence. And you gave this really good example of something that actually corporations would be very interested in funding, which is teaching their employees about phishing techniques.
Absolutely.
And this is pH phishing, and that's when you have some sort of a malevolent incoming threat that happens that is hidden in some way. It's obfuscated that it is a threat, and that people that are susceptible to not having vigilance with that style of incoming threat fall for it. Something like if you see PayPal.com sending you an email, that's good. It's like support@paypal.com. But if it's support RU at PayPalRU.com or whatever,
right.
It could be coming from a Russian phishing scam or from someone in the U.S. trying to cast the phishing scam to Russia or somewhere else in the world as well. These things happen a lot where it's like, please submit your password, your account is under some sort of issue. But to get people practicing, corporations getting their employees practicing, but also getting people around the world practicing this like little kindergarten task of be vigilant with what the email addresses that you're getting, with how it's structured, what they're asking you for. And this is just like what we do when we see a news source that you want to see what the source is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We did a case study on that with a cybersecurity company. And when I was talking to David No, who was the behavior designer who was working on this, I goes, do you see there's a peace tech angle in this? And I said, absolutely. I mean, as you said, globally, people are losing their ability to discern fact from fiction. But if we said, well, how are we going to address that as a society in the United States? That feels big, abstract, don't even know where to start. Who's going to pay for it? How would you do that? I mean, how do you do this in any kind of practical way? But a corporation, on the other hand, has a felt pain point because they can calculate how much employee time is lost in dealing with all this phishing, what the vulnerabilities are to the enterprise if an employee accidentally clicks on a link that brings in some sort of malevolent software into the organization. They can compute hard costs to those behaviors of not having critical thinking. In which case they go, okay, this is what it's costing me, so I'm willing to pay this much to fix it.
Yep.
Right? So corporations are incentivized to address this problem. And so I was saying to David, I go, if we could do this so that it is a building block and you can take an employee and say, get them to be discerning enough to understand fact from fiction in email, then the next step is how to discern fact from fiction on sources of information they read about on the internet.
Yep.
Because what does it mean to a company, to a CEO? He or she has their people working and doing product research, and if they can't tell the difference between the information that's valid and that's not valid, then the company might go down a path erroneously because it got bad information.
Yep.
Right? So it actually hits their bottom line. But then once those people are trained, once they leave their office and go home, it's not like those skills went away. Mm-hmm. Whatever they're reading on the internet, all of a sudden they have a new lens. They have this capability of saying, "Wait a minute, what I learned at work is if it has these attributes, it's probably phony. I'm reading this personally. This is probably wrong."
Yeah, I'm such a big fan of this kindergarten class that we all take on phishing that increases our critical thinking, and then there's first grade and second grade classes that we can take that make us better at. being able to, we do it all the time with, we don't typically just go to one source for information, or we don't go to one source when we buy something. We go and shop, meaning we look at 3 or 4 different companies and prices. And similarly, when we look for knowledge, we don't just go and look at one specific source. We're looking at multiple sources and trying to look at those. So it's interesting to me also thinking about how like this style of critical thinking for children and for adults can really catalyze the again, like a deeper behavioral change towards positive prosocial long-term behavior. And I love that. And corporations will front the bill because they see that for them it's multiple millions of dollars of cost if they don't do this for their employees.
Right. There's a real bottom line here. A colleague of mine once said recently, a confused mind does nothing. And if you look at the strategy, the psychological strategy behind all these disinformation campaigns from Russia, it's a really elegant hack in terms of warfare, because they don't need to fire a single shot. All they need to do is confuse Americans so they do nothing. Because we don't know what's real and what's not. And because we don't, we can't move forward. We can't act with confidence. And so it's as if they had transmitted a nerve drug digitally, cybernetically, to all of us, so we're paralyzed. And all we can do is dispute, what's real and what isn't.
Oh man, yeah. When you put it into this cybernetic nerve drug, I think that's a very interesting and novel way to put it. Is how can you also potentially do a cybernetic positive prosocial drug or behavior change?
Right.
Yeah, because
a vaccine. Yeah.
Yeah. What would that be? I mean, we have another interesting example that you gave earlier too before we started about the Fair Game Alliance, which I thought was really interesting. So you can take the companies that are typically trying to hold on to the players that are playing their games, and harassment and bullying are major issues that cause players to leave playing games. And so they're now sharing best practices, and 60 or so of these companies sharing best practices. So what would these best practices be for society at large to catalyze more positive prosocial behavior?
Yeah, and again, for the business models for these video game companies, they're not advertising driven, right? So it's subscription based. It might be a loot box and so on, but it's add-ons. You go in and I'm going to buy stuff for my avatar. I'm going to buy a costume. I'm going to buy weapons. I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy that. The only way there could be a buying opportunity is if I'm actually on the platform playing, right? And so because of that business model, these video game companies are then majorly incentivized to keep those players happy. And it needs to be a pleasant enough environment that they hang around and play, right? Unlike Twitter and Facebook, where their business model is based on ads, or YouTube, so that the underlying behavior of the people who participate on the platform doesn't matter to their bottom line. As long as they're selling ads. So there's no incentive for them, except for one of common decency. But that's only when it suits them to do something to change. And also the scale of their problem is quite large.
Do you have with what you and your team are seeing a massive value add? Again, there's value, deep economic value in people learning positive prosocial behavior, and corporations funding the employees to be trained in these types of behaviors, because it just catalyzes more financial reward for themselves, and also just it catalyzes more harmony between humans when we can incentivize. Do you guys have? We've listed so many examples, but I'm really curious about on a global level about like a kindergarten fishing course that I can go and take, or that I can now start seeing the carbon footprint for my transit, right, or for the items that I'm buying. Are these are the most cutting edge ideas for for positive prosocial behavior, and like how can other people, partake in incentivizing this positive prosocial behavior as well?
So we're working with one bank in Europe where the CEO has stated what their aspirations are to be as a bank in terms of sustainability and different sustainable development goals that have been put forth through the UN in terms of gender, environment, fairness, and so on. And so we've been working with them and saying, okay, so how many of you are aware that, your CEO in this other country has put this out? They go, oh, we didn't know that. And I go, okay, so how are you going to operationalize that? Because otherwise it's just rhetoric, right? And a lot of values are put in the box of CSR, which is about this big, right? And especially with these companies we've talked to them, they one of their pain points is recruiting. How do they get talent in?
Yeah.
How do you get millennials and the next generation to come in? They're very values based.
Yes.
And they, Greta Thunberg. And so they want to work with a company that's actually going to have positive impact. But again, positive impact is as abstract, and social impact is as abstract as peace. So we were always trying about how do you get this grounded into practical everyday behaviors? What does it, how will I know it? How will I recognize it when I see it? Mm-hmm. And so we've been working with them to think, okay, if we're talking about, more female leadership, we got to put numbers on it. What do you mean when you say that?
Yeah.
And what do you mean when you say sustainability? Give me a number. And once you start putting numbers around them, then people can start rallying around that.
Yes.
And I think that's only going to increase because you either are going to adapt to what the world is going to look like in 10 years, or you're going to be out of the game. Mm-hmm. You'll be forced out of the game because of regulators, or you'll be forced out of the game by consumers because they will have chosen that aspirational startup that just disintermediated your industry.
Yep. Yep.
So you actually don't have a choice. If you want to survive, you've got to change. You've got to incorporate this into your products and services and not just the PR opportunity that your CSR gives.
Yeah, yeah. A deeper embedding of the big picture of something like the Sustainable Development Goals into into the essence of ourselves into the projects that we build on an actual tangible numerical behavior changing
right. And in order for that to happen, it can't happen by engineering centric or engineering exclusive teams alone. This is where you need to get people from other disciplines
like
to come into those product development teams.
Yeah.
And to be able to say, okay, I come from human rights. What would this supply chain software look like if we made it impossible for our vendors to commit human rights violations?
Yes.
I mean, and people go like, what? And I go, look, so when you do your taxes, Alan, do you use something like TurboTax?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people do, right?
Yeah.
They use a TurboTax or some software to file their taxes.
Yes.
Now, TurboTax is designed so that it's foolproof. You will never violate any IRS laws when you use their software to file your taxes.
They'll make sure that
you're always inside the, you're good.
Yeah.
Right? Because they know the rules, they know the law, they've put it into software code.
Yes.
Right? And so for me, behaviorally, it's easy for me to file a good tax return, right? Because I just do it, and I'm not going to get out of bounds, right?
So when a child's born to the world, if their world is codified in a way where they can't make any malevolent behavior.
So, I mean, we're talking about something, these are aspirational, and we're never going to get 100%. But we know that in the absence of that aspiration, these technologies can and have been weaponized. Mm-hmm.
In absence, like people will find loopholes to
right.
to do, yeah.
And so part of it is being mindful and saying, okay, within the letter of the law, people can't use our software to violate the law in this thing that we're doing. That would be an interesting. I mean, there are going to be all sorts of unintended consequences with that scenario as well. but how do we instrument it so we can monitor that the good that's being created far outweighs the bad? Because right now, a lot of software there's some good being created, but the far outweighs the good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This seems to continuously come back to having a first principles mentality around the things that we build into the world, and having them be decreasing the potential for malevolence and increasing the potential for positive prosocial behavior. And that definitely requires humanities, and that requires ethicists and philosophers embedded into engineers of all sorts, not just computer science engineers, but just engineering of all sorts, designing of all sorts. So and having some sort of a closed loop, immediate system for an inclusive stakeholding plus positive prosocial behavior fabric that are pieced together. So I'm maybe immediately getting that emotional boost when I'm helping someone, they get an emotional boost, and you can both feel that. But maybe there's also some sort of another added layer of like a digital ledger where you're getting some sort of a token. Who knows? This is all massive part of our future, and I'm very interested in what you guys are doing. I think us being able to help be a catalyst for spreading what peace innovation is doing around the world is something that we care a lot about, and hopefully we can continue featuring you guys as you continue making new like little combinatorics of peace innovation and releasing them into the world, and we can continue highlighting them to people and hopefully incentivizing or catalyzing their creative endeavoring into also creating peace innovation style technologies. I'm a huge fan. You guys are doing great work.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to ask you about your relationship to source, or to all that is, or to God, or to whatever you want to call it. Like, what is your relationship to the reason why you're here and the reason why we're all here?
Why am I here? I am here, as I said in the beginning, to carry forward the values and memories of my ancestors. So my mother's from Mexico, and you know, I kind of identify as Mexican American, and there is this saying that you're never dead as long as people remember your name. And the when I think of all the people who have come and gone, and all the things that they were trying to accomplish, their ambitions, big or petty, whatever mark they made on the world or didn't make on the world, it comes down to the relationships that we had with the people who were closest to us. And if we're successful human beings at all, we're alive as long as people remember our name. When my father died, and my father was a humble man, he was a construction worker, the church was standing room only.
Wow.
And then everyone went over to the graveside.
Yeah.
And you know, I've been to a fair number of funerals in my day, and there's something poignant and sad when there's like 3 people who show up.
Totally.
Right? And there were so many people who showed up that he had touched their lives. And I'm his oldest daughter, and I had no idea.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah,
it's like, wait, what? I've never heard this story.
Why didn't I get to those stories?
Why didn't, you know, and it's interesting because we never really know our parents.
Yeah.
Right? We think it's like a mom, dad, and whatever, and they're sitting there on the couch reading the newspaper, whatever.
It's hard to get behind their eyes and ask good questions that query their most profound experiences.
Or even to be able to recognize them as whole people and not just a stereotypical role, very narrow, very flat, two-dimensional.
Whole people.
Right? And to
you want to have the biggest funeral ever. The most people show up to your funeral ever because
and it was just crazy because my sisters and I were looking around going like, okay, we recognize a lot of these people, but who are all these other people? and he was just a construction worker, but what his gift was attention, and he was very wise, and he mentored a lot of young people.
Yeah.
in his life. And those people came back
Yeah.
and showed up to thank him. Because he listened. And he was interested. And he was curious.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm going like, wow.
This is a beautiful story about your father.
And everybody was there, and it was amazing. It was amazing. I should be so lucky that I have, I'm thinking when I die, will hopefully my son will show up, and there might be 4 people, but I could not in my imagination envision having so many people show up at my own funeral.
Yeah, that's
right.
What a cool goal. I love that goal of causing so much love, cascades of love, ripples that forever land in people's hearts. So important. Yeah,
and so that becomes part of their epigenetic memory.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
We talk about genetics and epigenetics, and people inherit their ancestors' memories.
Yeah.
Cellularly.
Yeah.
Can we push this kindness as far into the future as possible?
Yeah.
And what might that look like?
Yeah.
Ronnie Edry, who did Israel Loves Iran, he did this illustration of a heart, and he says, "This is a bomb. Throw it." Right. And so imagine throwing love bombs 4 generations into the future.
Yeah.
Kindness bombs 3 generations, and that in what I mean is that it's in people's cells. It's in their DNA. You've rewritten their DNA in a way that future generations will thrive. We're really good at rewriting people's epigenetics so that people have inherited trauma.
Yeah.
What might it look like if we could rewrite people's genetics so that they had inherited kindness?
Yeah. I love it. I love how it's both talking about the way to cause these cascades, these ripples of landing kindness in people's hearts, but it's also the action of actually implementing that is through the positive prosocial behavior change.
Yeah.
And then pairing those things together is a recipe for a beautiful future. Yeah. Especially working in behavior change. This is an interesting question to ask you. What are your thoughts on free will versus determinism?
Ah, my goodness. As a Catholic girl, I remember going back and forth on this. I think it's an and. I don't think it's an or.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, context shapes the potentiality of what behaviors are possible, right? And so you change a person's context, it changes how they'll behave.
So if I'm in a very restricted environment that I only have one choice, there's no free will. If I have millions of degrees of freedom to do something,
then I've got a lot of free will. I have a lot, but because free will is really about agency, right? And free will, and if we think about agency, and I've been in Silicon Valley a long time, and I didn't come from a privileged background, but I have lived and worked among people who have had great privilege and grew up with great privilege. The mindset of people who have privilege is that they have free will. Okay? The mindset of people who have not grown with privilege is they don't feel they have free will. And both are true. Because if you grow up in poverty, if you grow up in limited circumstances, there's just not, you don't have a lot of, your locus of control is incredibly small, right?
You have $1 for that meal, and that's all you have, versus I have abundance. I can buy whatever I want.
Exactly. So I think both exist in the world. Part of my work is to help people get more agency. And part of getting more agency is being very clear on what you want. I grew up in a context where I didn't want anything because it wasn't possible. So my I want muscle is about as good as my bicep is these days. There's not much there. But other people who grow up with their I want, where their parents are asking, Johnny, so what do you want? They're constantly thinking about what they want, and then more often than not, they get it. And so they got a big bicep on that. part of it for me is like, how do I get that mental fitness to start exercising your I want? Because when you do that, then you start imagining the world that you want, the life that you want, how you want your day to be.
Yep.
And it can be as small a choice as, do you want milk in your coffee or do you want soy milk in your coffee? Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Do you want to
drive this route or that
route, right? All those things are small acts of will, of agency. And when we start being intentional about that, then we start being intentional about how do we design our life. And when we start curating and designing our life, it affects the people around us. And they behave differently because you're different. Mm-hmm. And there's a ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, do you think that this is a simulation?
It doesn't matter.
Why?
Our brains can't tell the difference. It doesn't matter.
Okay. And what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
The most beautiful thing in the world. Nature. Life. Life in all its glory.
Yeah. It's such a blessing to have endeavored into life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've ever made life, you go, oh my God.
I made life.
I made life. This baby came out of me.
Yeah.
I grew that baby.
Or I grew food too is good. I grew life in that sense. Or
when I was pregnant, it was a very interesting experience. Because prior to that, it was basically a brain on a stick. I wasn't really connected to my body all that much. And then I got pregnant. And my body kicked my brain to the curb and said, move over, sister. We're in charge now.
Yeah.
And it was the strangest feeling I'd ever had in my entire life.
Did you become like super more connected to your system, to the
absolutely
what you're eating is what the baby's eating,
right? But it wasn't intellectual. Pregnancy is not a head exercise.
It was all
it's your heart and your body and everything else saying like, we got this. We were built to do this. You just get out of the way.
Men need to somehow feel that. If men can feel that, we can have a better world.
Because then you realize, oh, I am really super responsible. Everything I do is going to impact that person.
Yes.
And so when we think about how good we can be to each other, that is about as elemental as you can be, because you have these cells growing inside your body in the process of becoming.
Yeah.
And what you eat and what you think and what you feel and your stress and your emotional state and your mental state and everything all have an influence on that other person. So you can either inflict violence on that person that they will carry for the rest of their lives, or you can inflict love and kindness on that person that will influence them for the rest of their lives. It's your choice.
Yeah.
So that's about as close to being God as I've ever been.
Oh, Margarita, thank you so much for coming on our show.
You're welcome.
Thank you for all your incredible work.
Yeah, thank you.
It's such an honor and a pleasure to collaborate with Peace Innovation Lab and just hopefully catalyze more positive prosocial behavior around the world and have all these examples that you got to unpack for us on the program and hopefully inspire other people, you guys,
hopefully
to take action. Yes, thank you. And everyone, and check out all of the links in the bio below to Margarita's work. You can check that out on her website, margaritaquihuis.com. Also, peaceinnovation.stanford.edu and peaceinnovation.com as well. Check those out. Check out her LinkedIn and Twitter profiles. Check out the Peace Innovation Twitter as well. Have more conversations with your friends, families, coworkers, people online about peace innovation in general, about values-based innovation, about positive prosocial behavior, about how we can incentivize that and spread that around the world, everyone. And also support the artists, the entrepreneurs, the leaders in your communities that you believe in. Support them and help them grow. You can find all of our links below to Simulation. You can help us continue doing cool things, like collaborating with great organizations like the Peace Innovation Lab. And also, go and build the future, everyone. Manifest your dreams into the world. We love you very much. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you soon. Peace.